So this chapter is, I believe, the penultimate chapter. Close. Very, very close. We are close to the end. This chapter, I'm not going to switch to the screen view at all. I just want to I obviously know the story. I lived it, I wrote it, and I will use the chapter as just notes, so to speak. And the point of this is to drive home what you already know. When you participate in education, you're going to have contact with people that can be lifelong uh, people that will provide inspiration, answers, guidance, reassurance, corrections, criticisms. And Aloha is no different in DHI in that regard. And I will just say there's something special about those connections at Aloha. There is something that you can't define, that you have relationships. I've seen people at, one convention, then 2 years later at the next convention. COVID is what I'm referring to 2 years later. And everyone's super interested with how things are going and accomplishments and moving on, etc. I just can't believe that I have the emails of certain people that were extremely helpful, and they're incredibly gracious. And this story is the cornerstone in terms of gracious behavior. So a very exciting aspect of Aloha during the week of classes and convention is how many famous faces you will see. Leaders in the industry, the most famous people no one has ever heard of, as I like to put it. They're everywhere, just everywhere. People who have authored books, people who have worked at factories and their hands have touched epic-sized work, and the brilliance in their mind is responsible for it. These famous people that no one's ever heard of, they're everywhere, and very often visit from classroom to classroom during the 5 days when classes are being taught. People you may or may not know or recognize meander in and out of classrooms all throughout. Visitors, perhaps a lost student, and the Aloha official photographer are easily spotted. On the morning of the first class I took, this was Aloha 2019, I was in, as I had just mentioned earlier, high security cylinder servicing and large format, those two classes. Whatever it was, I forget, 2 days, 4 days, it doesn't matter. On the morning of the first class, high security cylinder servicing, 2 gentlemen entered and took seats at the rear of the room. Mr. Link acknowledged them, though not to the class at large. Just kind of waved at the 2 people who walked in, clearly knew who they were. And after 5 seconds, people lost interest and just, okay, turn back, let's move on with the class. I and all my classmates soon lost interest in who these 2 visitors were and resumed full attention to the subject at hand. Now be mindful. I had that very private reason for also wanting to participate. I needed the education on those 2 exams I was going to take, but I also was going to take the opportunity to get my paper that I was writing in front of someone. That was the second goal of going to Las Vegas. And when you fly from Florida, where I live in Florida, there are no direct flights, so you've got to make an effort to get there. That needed to happen, as far as I'm concerned. It was my only chance, is the bottom line. During the mid-morning break, just like DHI, I approached Mr. Link, explained what I was doing regarding my article on mastering, and asked him to take a peek at lunch. His response, more of a reaction really, was him stretching his arm, pointing a finger to the rear of the room and saying, "You don't want me to look at it." He says, "You want him to look at it." Just pointing at someone. One of those 2 gentlemen that came in and quietly sat down. I turned my head. I looked in the direction he was pointing. The him he was referring to was one of the 2 gentlemen who entered the class earlier. A comely, quite unassuming man in an average unassuming suit and tie. The jacket may have been tweed, perhaps 15 years old. I was unsure if Mr. Link was rejecting me or just merely casting me off to a lesser individual. I didn't know. But what I didn't think was that it didn't occur to me that he was wanting to make sure I had the best possible help. I felt a bit, dejected. The man he was pointing to made no real acknowledgement of this odd interposition, and I may have betrayed a hint of dejection at the moment as my mind was assuming the latter. I will admit I was more than dejected, somewhat despondent. I really wanted this technical portion of my article to be reviewed for blatant error, and it seemed as if the opportunity just slipped through my fingers. I decided, I had to back up my expectations of what was going to happen. I was going to have to leave there assuming that I wasn't going to corral anyone to look at my paperwork. The problem was I didn't have a backup plan. I didn't have plan B to get a superior to review my work, if only for a few moments. Just enough to spot any fatal flaws. I thought that someone would look at it and say, yeah, that's clearly wrong, redo that, and then you're okay. That's what I was hoping for. I decided I would have to be more forward with Mr. Link after lunch, because I assumed the mystery man would be long gone when lunchtime came. I just said to myself, I'm going to force myself on him. Just make sure that, he doesn't get out of the room without looking at what I was working on. So lunchtime came, and the man was still in the same chair in the back of the room, at the same table, quite alone, though I was just marginally happy to see him sitting there. I would be quite rude, after the earlier introduction by shotgun, to just walk past, so I decided I would engage him. As I approached the rear of the room and the man, I started feeling as if I had nothing to lose. I truly didn't. I realized at least I would have a chance at a second best person to look at my work. I figured, well, if I couldn't get the best, I'll take the second best. It occurred to me that the gentleman must be at least worthy of some value, and questioned myself for judging a book by its cover. After all, the instructor recommended him. I did start to think to myself, maybe I'm off, maybe I'm wrong. I approached him, introduced myself, stated what my project was, and asked politely if he would take a look. The man, in a somewhat muted, though thoroughly polite and vibrant tone, agreed. I opened up my laptop on the table and started nervously explaining to the gentleman what he was looking at. I didn't know anything about this person. It could have been all Chinese to this person. I began with my KBA. I had used the Corbin Russwin Mastering KBA as a way of I've used it in a way that was not shown. I took liberty with it, expanded it in a way that I thought would be novel. I had studied the portion of the original text for so long, which is the Corbin Russwin Cylinder Manual. I could no longer be sure of myself, and that was really part of the problem. The man gazed on, was rather still, uncommunicative, though was what I will here describe as intently studying my KBA. I realized after I stopped talking and he started staring, there was something going on. Though I at first thought he might be faking interest and being very polite, or perhaps had no foggy idea what I was crowing on about. Though at this moment I began to realize this man was studying my KBA, as if to break it, stretch it, turn it over, and see if it would fail in the mental tests he was exercising it through. Not wanting to impede the stream of inner thought I was witnessing, it was my turn to be mute. It was now quite obvious this quite unassuming, thin, 60-year-old something man I have never met before was engaged in the process of decoding, possibly grappling with my work as if it was a mind puzzle. It really looked like that. It grew very quiet at the table. It was just the two of us, in that empty room, large enough for 100 people. with the strange patterns of commercial carpet and the hum of HVAC. As the long seconds turned into quarter minutes into half minutes, I started to feel as if I was intruding in this man's private time. Was he sleeping, but only with his eyes open? Was my article simply atrocious and my conclusions pathetic? I finally built up courage and began to stir, though before I could speak, the gentleman said, "I see what you're doing here." Or he said, "I see what you're doing there." He then asked a couple of clarifying questions. And as I answered him, I felt as if the amount of water that falls over Niagara just washed away my confusion and self-doubt. He asked pointed questions, questions only a fellow student of locksmithing could ask. I explained how and where I took liberty with the original text, and he seemed to concur that my extrapolations were not out of bounds. I could tell that he wasn't an expert in mastering, meaning it wasn't something that he spent every day thinking about. And obviously, I'm sure he's aware of it. He's at an Aloha convention. And even though DHI people don't bump into it ever, and I've never heard of a job being specified and having master... that's not true. I actually have seen it once or twice, but very rarely. It seemed like he wasn't completely familiar with it, but he certainly understood the science of locksmithing. Most importantly, nothing was negative in his feedback. He didn't find any gaping problems. Didn't mention any at all. So I felt quite relieved. I thanked him excitedly, relieved mostly, and realized I just consumed 20 minutes of this man's 1-hour lunch break, and I felt immediately awful for that. He gave me his business card, and taking his leave, I went to the dining area, quickly filled a plate of leftovers. Not a lot of salad eaters at Aloha. It seems as if I had all the leafy greens all to myself. Found people I knew at a close table and sat down to start eating as they were finishing. It was great. The most technical part of my article just survived, dare I say, peer review? Fast forward a couple weeks, maybe a month, I forget, I don't know. I'm back in Florida, and I took the two classes. I took the two classes, high security cylinder, large format. I've got the textbooks. Now I'm focused on studying all of that, studying manufacturer's data, physical study of the material, to prepare to schedule to take the classes. That's what I'm actively doing at this point. So I'm back. I'm at this desk with this computer studying. I was intently focused and studying for the high security PRP at that moment, high security cylinder servicing proficiency exam. This, after all, was the primary reason for traveling to Las Vegas, if you recall, to learn firsthand those things needed to pass this proficiency exam. That evening, I needed to dig deeper into Medico, and it was that part of the book that I was going into. And I'm thinking in my head, a high security cylinder servicing exam is going to be Medico heavy. I had heard that Medico has 75% of all the North American high security cylinder work. I believe it, that they have that sort of market dominance. So you could expect there to be a lot of Medico questions, or at least I did. I knew there would be questions on the exam about keying rules regarding master and change keys and the relationship to the cuts on the control key for operating the control log, as the rules specifically relate to Medico. I knew there would be questions about this. How could there not be Medico questions on the PRP, I thought. It made me realize I needed to learn as much of it as I could. And Mr. Link is a great Medico teacher. I was studying in the same textbook, the textbook I brought home from the class. As I flipped towards the Medico section, I noticed a business card, and that's what I do at DHI or at Aloha. Business cards are traded. I stick them right into the textbook because I know someday I'll go back to the textbook. And I will remember that I've received someone's business card, so I'll know where to find it. That's a common thing for me to do. I found the one business card right in the Medico section. Just coincidental it was there, I guess. or somewhere in the book, and I realized, oh, it was that nice quiet man's card, the man who helped me, the one that gave me 20 minutes of his lunch hour. I looked at it fondly and recollecting his patience, and then set it aside. Though for the first time, then and there I realized he was from Medico. Okay, that makes sense that a Medico guy would walk in a high security cylinder servicing class. But it also made sense to me because his kindness, his patience, is exemplary of every interaction that I've ever had with Medico technical support. They're always a showcase of professionalism. Coincidentally, I called them this morning to ask how to dissect a switch style cam lock, a cam lock that's going to be a maintained key switch. And the way that the part number was constructed in the specifications was the way they used to write it 10 years ago, and I needed to get the push over the edge to know what I was talking about. Just so helpful at Medico, just so helpful. And like I said, it made sense. Super nice, super helpful. Everyone from Medico. Looking at the card, I put it aside and I wondered to myself. I've got his card, and I looked at it, and I remembered how nice he was and how helpful he was. And I looked at his name. I says, oh, I wonder if he goes by the name of Pete or Peter. It was Peter on the business card, but I wondered, hey, do his friends call him Pete, or is he Peter? I don't know why I thought of that. I just did. I also thought whether or not his wife told him to stop wearing that old sport coat. I proceeded on to the Medico section of the class textbook, and the thought came to me to Google search the patent for Medico 3. And if you're familiar with Medico, you've got biaxial, Medico 3, and now Medico 4, other, technologies that are in there. But Medico 3 was the standard, and, probably going to need to know how Medico 3 works. The patent is really great when you're studying something because it will allow you to see what it looked like originally. It's a unique way, if you're going to stare at it and study the drawing, to be able to yourself pull it apart and see what pieces do what, especially when it comes to cylinders. The manufacturers, Medico has their service manuals, and I think you really only get them if you take their class, even though my relationships in the industry has allowed me to get my hands on the original manual, the Medico 3 manual, and maybe the new one as well. I don't remember if I have it. But if you want to see how something works, that patent can be a great way to see it. So I searched for the Medico 3 patent and its very cool locking sidebar. If you were to look at it, you'll see. I knew the Medico 3 had been around for a while, and I also knew that the patent was set to expire relatively soon on this product. I've been studying all kinds of high security stuff, and I had said to myself, what is Medico going to come up with next? I was excited to see it. I knew that would be 2021, and the Medico 4 is now out, and it has a movable element in it, is what it is, and that's to thwart 3D printing. And a movable element is by no means a Medico invention. I can produce a patent, I think, from 50 years ago from a German company that has a movable element. And it's just the coolest thing how a movable element works. You've got to be able to have a key that can move up here, get over here, and then move down here in order to get through the broaching of the cylinder. So there's a little ball bearing in the key blank that can float. And if you don't have that movable element in the key, you will never stick that key in there. So Medico incorporated that clearly in a novel way. Anyways, patents are an easy internet search and are a crucial step at researching lock technology for the first time. That's how I approach it. This medical patent is not unlike others in that it's filled with words that do not seem to belong together, weird numerical references, cross sections, hatch drawings, witnesses' names, and signatures. I always look at the names of the inventor. I think I'm interested to know if they, if they have a neat, unusual name like Enzo, or is he just Jim? What's the name of this smart person? What name did the inventor's parents give the inventor? So I'm looking at the medical patent. I always look at the name of the inventor. There were two names on that medical patent. Are two. If you look it up, you'll see two. Neither name seemed familiar to me, except that, wait 1 minute. I looked at the business card. I looked back at the patent, back at the business card, and I realized the quite unassuming man who very graciously gave me for free 20 precious minutes of his day was none other than Peter Field, one of the two inventors of the Medico 3 platform. Just thunderstruck. I kid you not. I kid you not. Just, if that isn't why you participate, I don't know what is. This is why you join ALOA and DHI as well. This is why you remain in ALOA. This is why you participate in education. Every single person I've ever encountered at ALOA is willing to help. Even a person who is directly responsible for one of the cornerstone technologies of the company that supplies the majority of high cylinder security cylinders in North America is willing to help. The guy whose name is on the patent will sit with you and help you. You will meet some of the most famous people in the world no one has ever heard of. Thank you, Mr. Field. I did learn earlier this year that he has retired, and I hope it's treating him very well, and that if he ever comes to Southwest Florida to stop in, I owe him a full lunch hour, and I am buying. So, just a neat story. That's all true. Every inch of it is very true, exactly the way I said it. I was looking through that book, saw that card, kind of thought, oh, okay, that's neat, put it down, back in the book. Innocently, 20 minutes later, pulling up the patent. It was crazy. So, the penultimate is ALOA credentials. That is the penultimate where we're headed. And we're going to talk about a review of what I just showed you in the ALOA chapter, because it is basically the same. Just focus on that very quickly, and that's what we'll do. Thank you.